What if the house everyone laughed at was the only one built to actually last? And what if the mansion everyone envied was already rotting from the inside, just waiting for someone to knock on the right door? Before we go further, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this with someone who's ever been the quiet one in their own family. You'll want them to see how this story ends. My name is Maren Colby. I'm 32, and I build things for a living, not metaphorically. I mean, I frame walls, pour footings, and read blueprints the way other people read novels. That skill is exactly why this story goes the way it does. It started on a regular Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, the way most of the worst moments in my family always did. My mother, Deanne, had her tablet propped against the butter dish, scrolling through photos of my older sister's new home out on Larkspur Hill. 2 stories, a curved staircase, a kitchen island bigger than my entire bathroom. She turned the screen toward me like she was showing me a rare diamond. "Look at this flooring, Maren. Do you have any idea what imported oak costs per square foot?" I did know, actually. I know exactly what materials cost down to the last screw, but I just nodded and said it looked nice. My father, Wade, grunted his agreement from the head of the table. "Your sister really did it this time," he said, and left it there, like a verdict nobody could appeal. My sister, Paige, sat across from me, cutting her food into smaller pieces, pretending she wasn't soaking in every word of praise. Then my mother set her tablet down, folded her hands, and delivered the line she'd clearly been saving. "Honey," she said, "you're never going to have a house like your sister's." Nobody flinched. That silence after her words is what really got to me. Not the sentence itself, but the fact that nobody at that table thought it needed correcting. "Mom," Paige said half-heartedly, but her mouth was already curling into a small, satisfied smile. "You're just jealous, right?" my mother said, smiling that tired, soft smile she uses when she wants to sound kind while being anything but. I wrapped my hands around my glass of water. My knuckles are scarred from years of framing work, my palms rough from sanding and hauling lumber, and I've never once been ashamed of that. I looked at the photo on her tablet one more time, at the curved staircase, at the roofline behind it. And that's the exact moment the whole evening changed for me, though nobody else at that table noticed a thing, because I had just spotted something. Something none of them could see. Something that, once you notice it, you simply cannot unsee. Let me tell you a little about who I am, because it matters for everything that comes next. I run a small renovation company with just myself and 2 guys I trust completely, plus a truck older than my sister's marriage. I've been doing this work for 10 years. I learned framing from a stubborn old carpenter who would make you tear out an entire wall over a 1/4-inch mistake, and I never forgot what small errors can do to a house over time. 4 years ago, I bought a rundown little bungalow on Ferry Street. The roof sagged, the foundation had cracked in 2 places, and everyone told me to just knock it down and start fresh. Instead, I gutted it completely and rebuilt it, piece by piece, using my own savings. I did the structural calculations myself. I pulled every permit. I passed every inspection, not because I had to, but because I wanted to know without any doubt that my house was sound. It took me nearly 2 years and almost everything I had, and I live there now in a home I understand down to its bones. I don't talk about it much, honestly. That's probably my biggest flaw. I pour myself into the actual work and barely explain myself to anyone. And I've learned something important over the years. When you stay quiet, people fill in the blanks with whatever story is easiest for them to believe. For my family, the easiest story was that quiet meant struggling. That a woman with calluses on her hands and no husband and a small fixer-upper must be the daughter who fell behind in life. I let them believe that for years. It was simpler than explaining the truth. But that photo of Paige's new house bothered me for a reason I couldn't quite explain out loud. Not yet. Not at that table with my mother's tablet still glowing. You have to understand my sister to understand everything that follows. Paige is 4 years older than me, 36 now. For as long as I can remember, she was the daughter who made our mother glow with pride at every family gathering. The one whose achievements got mentioned first whenever relatives asked how the girls were doing. She married Grant Ashby 5 years ago. Grant calls himself a real estate developer. He wears an expensive watch and talks about opportunities the way other men talk about sports scores. He'd built a handful of homes on the newer side of our county before Larkspur Hill came along. I never trusted him, but I kept that opinion to myself, because disliking someone's tone isn't a real reason, and I try to have actual reasons before I judge people. Paige was never outright cruel to me. She was something trickier than that. She was gentle about it. She'd touch my arm and ask if business had been slow lately, tell me there was no shame in a small starter home, and mean every soft word as a tiny blade sliding in sideways. That afternoon, when she said, "You're just jealous, right?" she genuinely believed it. She'd been the successful one for so long that any strange look on my face could only mean envy. It couldn't possibly mean what it actually meant, which was concern. Because there was one thing about Grant's homes that I had never said out loud to anyone. Every single one of his projects had been finished by the same general contractor, a man named Kurt Halloway. And 2 years earlier, Kurt had called me to help frame one of his job sites. I walked off that property before lunch and never went back. I had my reasons. And now my sister was living inside a house built by that very same crew. My parents made up the other half of this puzzle, and I want to be fair to them, even now. My mother has spent her entire life keeping score in a town that pretends nobody keeps score, whose kids got into the better college, whose daughter married the more successful man, whose family had the nicer car in the church parking lot. When Paige married Grant and those beautiful new houses started going up, my mother finally had something worth bragging about, and she played that card everywhere. The hair salon, the neighborhood association meetings, every conversation she could steer toward my daughter's house on Larkspur Hill. It had stopped being about Paige a long time ago. It had become entirely about my mother's own scoreboard, and it was finally, gloriously winning. My father was quieter about all of it, and lately even quieter than usual. He'd had a difficult winter, a minor heart scare that landed him in the hospital for 2 nights, followed by a stack of medical bills he'd stopped opening at the kitchen table. I noticed he went very still whenever money came up in conversations about Paige and Grant. He'd stare at his plate the same way I did. I filed that away at the time, the way I mentally flag a hairline crack I'm not sure about yet. Watch it. Come back to it later. My mother caught me watching him once and completely misread it, the same way she misread almost everything about me. "Don't start," she said, though I hadn't spoken a single word. That warning told me more than she probably intended. You don't tell somebody to back off a subject unless that subject has real teeth. 2 days later, my mother called about the housewarming party. Paige and Grant were planning a huge open house at Larkspur Hill. The whole family, all the neighbors, half the church congregation. My mother informed me, in the tone she reserves for things that are absolutely not requests, that I would attend and I would be gracious about it. "You could at least go and be happy for your sister for once," she said. I could hear her scoreboard humming underneath every word. Normally, I would have mumbled something non-committal and hung up. Instead, I surprised us both. "Why doesn't Paige ever come see my place?" I asked. "I'll make coffee. She's never actually looked at what I did on Ferry Street." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause you get when someone genuinely cannot figure out your angle. "Your place," my mother repeated, like I'd offered to show off a garden shed. "Sure," she said finally, because saying no would have made her look unkind, and appearances are basically my mother's entire religion. She thought I was reaching for one small scrap of pride before the big event, and later I found out that's exactly what she told Paige. "Poor Maren wants to show off her little fixer-upper. Just let her have this one." But that wasn't what I was doing at all. I wasn't reaching for a scrap of anything. I had made a decision at that dinner table somewhere between the imported oak flooring and "you're just jealous, right?" And this invitation was the very first quiet move in that decision. I wanted my sister standing inside my house. I wanted her to feel what honest work feels like under her own feet, because I already had a strong suspicion of exactly what she'd feel. I just needed her to feel it first, before I said a single word. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I pulled up the photos my mother had sent the whole family and did what I always do. I zoomed in, not on the beautiful flooring or the massive island, but on the corners, on the roofline, on all the places nobody ever thinks to examine, which is exactly where a house tells you the truth. The ridge of that roof had a subtle dip, barely an inch over its whole length. The kind of thing an ordinary homeowner would never catch, but a framer sees it instantly, even from across the street. The flashing above the front entry had been installed backward, meaning rainwater would eventually run behind it instead of safely over it. And in one photo, right where that grand front wall met the ground, there was a fine crack already spidering through the foundation stone, and this house wasn't even a year old. New construction settles a little, that's normal. But it doesn't crack like that fast, in that exact spot. That corner was carrying serious structural weight for the whole front of the house, and it was already complaining loudly. You don't get a crack like that from bad luck. You get it from a footing poured too shallow, too fast, then dressed up beautifully on top so it photographs perfectly for social media. Someone had spent real money making that house look finished. And someone had quietly saved real money making sure it wasn't actually finished at all. I sat with that thought for a long time, because if I was right, it meant the beautiful house my entire family bowed down to was hollow in exactly the places that mattered most. And it meant my sister and her husband either had no idea, or they knew, and had decided not to care. I don't like guessing in my line of work. Guessing is how people get seriously hurt. So the next morning, I made a call to a woman named Ruth Ann, who's done tile and flooring work in this county for almost 30 years. Ruth then hears everything, because contractors talk in front of the flooring crew like they're invisible furniture. I asked her, casually, if she'd ever worked on any of Grant's projects. She went quiet in a way that answered the question before she even spoke. "I did the one right before Larkspur Hill," she finally said. "Got shorted for almost 2 months. Kurt kept saying the bank draw hadn't come through yet, and when it finally did come through, I still had to fight tooth and nail to get paid." She told me the crews on Grant's jobs were constantly being rushed, that inspections would somehow already be marked complete before the inspector had even shown up, and that Grant liked to bring in his own preferred appraiser rather than let the bank choose one independently. Every single word she said matched the picture in that photo perfectly. Rushed work, money moving strangely, real corners being cut in the literal corners of the building. I thanked her and sat in my truck in her driveway without turning the key for a while, because there's a real difference between simply disliking your brother-in-law and realizing your sister might be living inside a lie with her own name attached to the mortgage. One is family gossip. The other is the kind of thing that quietly ruins people's entire lives. My mother had told me I'd never own a home like my sister's. She had absolutely no idea how right she might turn out to be, for reasons none of us wanted. If you've ever sat quietly at a table while someone else got all the praise, stay with me, because this house has a lot more hiding inside its walls than granite countertops. Drop the word honest in the comments if you already sense where this story is headed, and keep watching, because it gets a lot more interesting from here. The visit happened on a Thursday afternoon. Paige pulled up to Ferry Street in her spotless SUV and actually sat inside it for a moment before getting out, double-checking the address like she couldn't quite believe this was the right place. She walked up in expensive shoes, looking at my little porch the way you'd look at a stray dog on the sidewalk. "It's cute," she said. "Cozy." Both of those words are what people say when they can't find anything genuinely true to say instead. I held the door open and let her step inside. And then she stopped walking. She stopped the exact way you stop when a floor doesn't behave the way you expect it to, because my floor doesn't bounce. It doesn't creak under pressure. It's completely solid, joists spaced 16 inches apart, properly reinforced and blocked, the way you build it when nobody's watching and you still genuinely care about the outcome. She took another step forward, and I watched her actually feel the difference beneath her own feet, the difference between a house that's truly built and a house that's merely dressed up to look built. She ran her fingers along the door frame, which fits perfectly tight, no visible gaps hiding a sloppy cut anywhere. Her eyes traveled up along the ceiling line, straight as a drawn ruler. I watched her do the math in her head without even realizing she was doing it. This tiny, cozy little fixer-upper her supposedly struggling sister lived in was more structurally sound than the sprawling 2-story home she slept in every single night. Then I watched something worse arrive on her face, right behind that initial surprise. Recognition. She had seen the inside of her own house once be. 4 back when the drywall hadn't gone up yet. She'd seen her own framing, and now, standing in mine, feeling what correct actually feels like, a memory she had buried for over a year suddenly came loose all at once. She pulled out her phone. Her hand wasn't steady. She didn't say a single word to me. She just stared at my perfectly straight ceiling line like it was silently accusing her of something. And then she dialed. I only heard her side of the conversation, but her side told me everything I needed to know. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking on that one syllable. "Mom, you need to come here right now." Whatever my mother said back, Paige clearly wasn't listening to it. "No, just come to Ferry Street." She turned away from me toward the window, one hand pressed flat against her own stomach, like she was physically holding something inside her chest. "I can't explain over the phone." "I'll tell you when you get here. Just get in the car." She hung up and stood there with her back to me for a long, heavy moment. When she finally turned around, her mascara had started smearing, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were young kids, long before she became the successful one and I became the quiet one. She looked genuinely frightened. "What did you do to your floors?" she asked, and it wasn't really a question about the floors at all. I told her the honest truth. "I built them right," I said simply. "That's the whole secret. I just built them the right way." She laughed, but it came out completely wrong, more like a sound you make when something actually hurts deep inside. "You have no idea," she started, then stopped herself because she wasn't ready to say whatever came next, not to me, not yet. She grabbed her purse off my counter. "I have to go, Mom's on her way." And she left in a hurry without ever having her coffee, coat still unbuttoned, leaving my front door wide open behind her. I stood in my honest little hallway and listened to her SUV screech out of my driveway. I hadn't said one unkind thing to her. I hadn't accused anyone of anything at all. All I'd done was let my sister stand on a floor that was genuinely built right. And apparently, that alone was enough to crack something wide open inside her. Now here's the part that made it hit her so hard, and why it mattered so much. In my hallway, I had a small section of drywall opened up because I was in the middle of running new wiring for a light fixture. The framing behind it was completely exposed. Studs, wiring, the support header above the doorway, all laid bare like an anatomy lesson. To most visitors, that's just an unfinished mess. To Paige, it was practically a mirror, because she had stood in her own house at that exact same construction stage. Grant had proudly walked her through Larkspur Hill during the build, showing off their big investment. She'd stood in her own hallway and looked at her own exposed framing. She hadn't understood what she was actually looking at back then. She'd nodded along at studs and wiring like someone nodding at a foreign language they don't speak. But she had stored that image away. And she'd stored something else too, something she had worked very hard to forget entirely. During construction, she'd once overheard 2 of Grant's framers arguing loudly with him in that very hallway. One kept insisting the support headers above the openings were undersized for the span, that they absolutely needed to be doubled up. Grant told him it was fine to close the wall up anyway, that the inspector wasn't coming back out to check again. She hadn't known what a header even was at the time, but she'd recognized real fear in that framer's voice, and she'd quietly filed it away with all the other small wrong things she had decided not to look at too closely. So when she stood in my hallway and saw my headers done correctly, properly doubled, solidly carrying their load exactly the way they're supposed to, that buried argument came rushing back with a name finally attached to it. She wasn't reading my studs like a builder would. She was hearing that framer's warning again, a full year too late, and finally understanding exactly what he had been desperately trying to tell her. One honest wall handed her the translation for every warning sign she had swallowed and ignored. That's the cruel thing about the truth. Sometimes you carry it around inside yourself for months without even knowing it's there, and all it takes is one honest wall to suddenly make it completely legible. She didn't need me to say a single word. Her own memory did all the accusing for me. And now she was speeding to her mother's house, carrying the worst realization of her adult life in her chest. And she still didn't know the half of what I'd already learned from Ruth Ann, and from that hairline crack spreading across the corner of her foundation. People sometimes ask me why I always do things the hard way, why I reinforce Eve. Ride joist and pull every single permit and wait patiently for inspectors even when nobody's actually checking, when the cheaper shortcut would still technically pass a casual walkthrough. I have a simple answer for that, and I gave it to Ruth Ann once years ago on a job site where a foreman wanted me to hide a bad cut behind decorative trim. Walls don't lie. People do. A wall will only ever hold up exactly what it was built to hold, nothing more, and it will eventually tell the truth about how it was constructed the day something finally goes wrong. A storm, a heavy snow load, a curious buyer's inspector with a flashlight and enough patience. You can lie to a bank. You can lie to your neighbors. You can even lie to your own mother in the church parking lot for 30 straight years. But you cannot lie to a header that's carrying far more weight than it was ever sized to hold. Sooner or later, it sags, and the sag doesn't care one bit about your reputation. That's exactly why I do things the hard way. Not because I'm noble, but because I've personally seen what the easy way eventually costs. And it always costs more in the end, and it always comes due at the absolute worst possible moment, in front of the worst possible audience. Standing in my hallway after Paige tore out of my driveway, I looked at my own open wall, my honest exposed studs, my carefully protected wiring, and I thought about Larkspur Hill, about all those neighbors and church friends about to gather inside a house that was quietly lying to every single one of them. My mother had turned that beautiful house into her personal scoreboard. And a scoreboard, it turns out, is a terrible thing to build on top of a cracked foundation. All right, before we go any further, I want you to do something small for me. If this story already has your full attention, type the word foundation in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from tonight. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it. My mother arrived at Ferry Street in under 20 minutes, which is practically a land speed record for her, and she did not come to admire my flooring. She burst through the front door I'd left open and started talking before she'd even fully crossed the threshold. "What did you say to your sister?" Her voice was high and fast, nothing like her smooth, polished committee voice. "She's completely falling apart. She won't tell me anything. She just keeps repeating your name." My father came in behind her, slower, standing near the doorway with his cap in his hands like a man attending a funeral. I told my mother the plain truth, that I hadn't done anything at all, that Paige came over for coffee, walked in, and got upset entirely on her own. "You put something in her head," my mother snapped. "You've always been jealous of that girl, and now you're trying to poison her own home for her." And here's the detail that changed how I saw the entire evening. My mother wasn't actually angry underneath all that volume. She was scared. She wasn't defending Paige's general happiness. She was specifically defending Paige's house, and she was doing it before she could possibly know there was anything real to defend it from. You don't rush to protect a wall unless some part of you already suspects it might be cracked. I looked over at my father by the door, and he wouldn't meet my eyes at all. That silence told me everything else I needed to know. They already knew something. Maybe not the specific details, maybe not the word fraud, but somewhere underneath all that pride, both of them had already suspected Larkspur Hill was built on something soft, and they had quietly decided a long time ago that the family's reputation mattered more than the truth. My mother had driven all the way to my house just to make me apologize for simply noticing what was right in front of everyone. That night, after they finally left, I sat down at my kitchen table and stopped guessing entirely. Our county publishes building permits online for anyone to look up. Most people never bother because they don't know what they're actually looking at. But I know exactly what I'm looking at. I typed in Paige's address on Larkspur Hill and waited for the records to load. New construction of that size leaves a clear paper trail. A permit, a series of required inspections, and on a construction loan, something called a draw inspection, where the bank sends someone out to confirm the work is genuinely complete before releasing the next chunk of funding. I read through the file twice just to make sure I wasn't seeing what I desperately hoped I'd see. The permit was there. The final inspection was marked complete, signed off, the house officially declared finished. But between the framing inspection and that final sign-off, there should have been a third mandatory draw inspection on a home that size. It simply wasn't there. The record jumped straight from framing to final, esque, ipping the exact step where someone was supposed to walk through the structure and confirm it before the largest chunk of loan money went out the door. And the name listed on the appraisal was one I recognized, a name that had shown up in a county notice the previous year, flagged as part of a batch of suspiciously inflated property valuations. I printed every page, the permit history, the missing inspection, the appraiser's name. I slid it all into a plain manila folder and set it on my kitchen table where I would see it every single time I walked past. The county's own public website confirmed that third inspection never happened. That wasn't my opinion. That wasn't jealousy talking. That was the government's own official record, sitting quietly in a folder on my honest kitchen table. I barely slept that night. I kept getting up and checking the folder like it might somehow have changed its mind. Around 2 a.m, standing alone in my dark kitchen, I thought about my mother's tablet glowing in her hand, about her saying I'd never own a home like my sister's. For years, a sentence like that would have sat heavy in my chest for weeks. I would have wondered what was wrong with me, worked a little harder, said a little less. That's what people who take on too much responsibility tend to do. We assume the problem must be us. But standing there at 2 a.m, that old sentence didn't hurt anymore. It had transformed into something else entirely in my hands. It had become a compass. She was right. I would never own a home like my sister's. Mine was built honestly. Hers was built on a skipped inspection and an inflated appraisal and a header already straining under more weight than it was ever designed to carry. I would never own a home like that, and thank goodness for it. The words meant to shrink me had accidentally told me exactly who I was, and exactly who they had become. My father called me the following evening, which almost never happens since my mother is usually the one who calls. When I saw his name light up my phone, I knew it had cost him something to dial that number. He skipped the usual hello. "Leave it alone," he said, his voice more tired than I'd ever heard it, even during his hospital stay. "Whatever you think you've found, whatever you're planning, just leave it alone for the sake of the family." I asked him what exactly he was so afraid of. There was a long silence, and I could hear the television playing faintly in the background, my mother's world continuing on in the next room. Then my father finally told me something he'd been carrying alone. Back during that difficult winter, with medical bills piling up and his heart scare still fresh, he'd gone to Grant for help. Grant had presented him with an opportunity. My father had handed over a chunk of his remaining retirement savings to invest in the Larkspur Hill project, with a promise it would come back, doubled once the house eventually sold. "He's family," my father said, and I could hear exactly how badly he needed that to still be true. So there it was. My father wasn't protecting Paige's happiness or my mother's pride at all. He was protecting his own money, the very last of it. Because if Larkspur Hill turned out to be built on fraud, his retirement was already gone, and saying that out loud would make it permanently real. He wasn't a villain in some dramatic sense. He was simply a frightened older man who had made a terrible bet on the wrong son-in-law and genuinely couldn't afford, in every sense of the word, to be wrong about it. I decided, after that call, exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to sneak around quietly behind everyone's back. I also wasn't going to scream and cause a scene, because that has always been my mother's instrument, never mine. I was going to walk the truth directly into the exact room my mother had chosen to celebrate her lie, and I was going to set it down gently in front of the very same audience she'd spent her whole life performing for, not out of cruelty. Because that room was where the real damage had been living quietly for years, and that room was exactly where it needed to be undone. I filed a formal complaint with the county building department, the kind any citizen has every right to file. I handed over copies of everything in my folder to an inspector named Priya Adami, a woman known throughout the county for being thorough and completely unmoved by anyone's hurt feelings. She read through the permit history, saw the missing draw inspection, recognized the flagged appraiser's name, and went very still and very professional. "If that third inspection wasn't done and this house was still signed off as final," she said, "that's a real problem, and it belongs to the county now, not just to you." She told me Larkspur Hill wasn't even the only property tied to that same appraiser. The county had already quietly opened a review into a batch of suspicious permits on TH. At side of town, and Grant's projects were sitting right in that stack. My complaint hadn't started anything from nothing. It had simply pushed one address to the very top of a file that was already wide open. The soonest she could get out to Larkspur Hill for a preliminary inspection happened to be the exact same Saturday, the exact same hours. My mother had already scheduled for the big housewarming party. I hadn't arranged that coincidence at all. I simply didn't get in its way. Saturday arrived clear and cool, a beautiful day for a party, and an even better day for the truth to finally surface. I wore clean work clothes, dark jeans, a pressed flannel shirt, my boots wiped clean, because I wanted to walk into that celebration looking exactly like what I actually am. That was always the entire point. Larkspur Hill looked like something straight out of a magazine when I arrived. Cars lined up along both sides of the street, balloons tied to the mailbox. The house packed full of relatives, neighbors, and half the church congregation. My mother moving through the crowd in her best dress, glowing like the queen of a room she had built specifically to make me feel small. Paige spotted the folder under my arm before anyone else did, and every drop of color instantly drained from her face. She crossed the room quickly and whispered, close enough that no one else could hear, "Please tell me you're just jealous. Please." Her voice was shaking on the very same words she'd once used to cut me down, except now she wasn't accusing me of anything. She was quietly begging me to make it be true, because if I was simply jealous, then her house was fine, her marriage was fine, and none of what some part of her already suspected was actually real. I didn't answer her directly. I simply walked past her toward the granite island where Grant stood holding court, bragging to some neighbor about his next big development. I waited for him to notice me, and I asked one quiet question. "Where's the third draw inspection on this house?" He blinked just for a split second, but I caught it. The smoothness drained right out of him. "I'm sorry, what is she even talking about?" he said, forcing a small laugh for the crowd. I didn't laugh along with him. "The bank is supposed to confirm the framing before releasing that big second draw of money," I said calmly. "The county has absolutely no record it was ever done, which makes me wonder exactly what the bank was shown instead." I set the folder down on the granite countertop, right beside the cheese board, and opened it page by page for everyone to see. The permit history with the official county seal, the missing inspection line, the flagged appraiser's name next to the county's own published notice. My mother snatched the top page and read it, and I watched her hand begin to tremble, because she can spin a rumor beautifully, but she cannot argue with an official county seal in front of her entire church community. That's when the knock came. Firm, official, unhurried. Priya stepped into that packed front hallway in her county jacket, clipboard in hand, right on schedule. "I'm looking for the property owner," she announced. "The county received a complaint regarding a permit discrepancy. I'll need to see the draw inspection records, and I'll need to walk the structure." Grant started talking fast, all his smoothness gone, stammering about paperwork and misunderstandings. Priya simply taped an official notice to the frame of that grand arched doorway. Violation notice. Records required. Structure subject to reinspection. Paige turned to Grant in front of her entire family and community and finally said the words that had been building inside her for a very long time. "You did this to us." The beautiful house went completely silent around them. My mother rounded on me instead, her polished voice completely gone, replaced by something raw and furious. I didn't raise my voice back. I simply picked up my pages, squared them gently, and slid them back into the folder, letting everyone watch me handle the truth carefully instead of violently. Then I said the only thing I had actually come to say. "I built my own house with my own 2 hands. Every joist, every wire, every permit. It's small, and it's honest, and it will still be standing long after this one gets torn open to answer for how it was really built." I looked at Paige with no triumph left in me at all, only exhaustion. "I never wanted a house like yours. I wanted a house that was true. I hope you find that too, someday." Then I walked out across those beautiful, hollow floors and into the clean afternoon air. The county's full investigation confirmed everything within weeks. Undersized headers, a shallow footing, work signed off that was never properly completed. The bank pulled its own records and found the same missing inspection, and once a bank starts using words like fraud, real consequences follow quickly behind it. Paige Mauve. Ed out with her kids into a small, honest rental across town, and when she finally called me a month later, she didn't apologize for years of small cruelties, not exactly, but she asked if she could come see how I'd built my floors, and this time she actually stayed for the coffee. My mother doesn't mention her daughter's house on Larkspur Hill anymore. The scoreboard she spent 30 years building came down in one single afternoon, in the exact room she had chosen, in front of the exact people she had spent her whole life performing for. I didn't do that to her. She built it herself on a foundation that was never solid to begin with, and bad foundations only hold up for so long. She once told me, with total confidence, that I would never own a home like my sister's. She was completely right, and it turned out to be the kindest thing she ever accidentally said to me. My door on Ferry Street stays open now to anyone who comes to it honestly, and closed for good to anyone who ever tries to measure my worth against a house I never wanted in the first place. A house is only ever as honest as the people who built it. And I've learned that families are exactly the same way, because walls don't lie, and given enough time, neither do the people standing inside them. If someone has ever measured your worth by a life you didn't choose, share this with them tonight. Tell me your own story in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about quiet people who finally, calmly, tell the truth. Script data. Original story about Maren Colby, a builder who is mocked by her family for her small, honest fixer-upper, while her sister flaunts a mansion built by a fraudulent contractor, culminating in a county in